Hello and welcome to this short video which explores ideas that are discussed in chapter 3 of my book Pragmatics Online. This video focuses on the acts of sharing, rebroadcasting and retweeting content online and considers it from a pragmatic perspective. So what is rebroadcasting? I define rebroadcasting as the act of sharing existing, usually third-party content with other users in your online social network. So this might be retweeting, it might be reblogging, it might be posting a link to a website on your Facebook feed. It involves the user distributing or redistributing content that they have not themselves created. Now we might also share original photos, or we might post original messages on our Facebook feed, our Twitter feed, our Instagram account. And this is also sharing. However, what I want to focus on for this short talk is sharing other people's content, rebroadcasting. I want to think about why we choose to do this, why we choose to repost something that somebody else has created. Now, Dana Boyd and her colleagues carried out a survey where they asked just this question in 2010. They asked their users via Twitter why they retweeted content, and they identified 10 reasons that users give for doing this, for retweeting content. Those 10 reasons are on the screen now. We're going to look at each of these in turn, so I'm not going to read them all out now, but feel free to pause the video if you want to take a closer look before we go on. The first motive that Boyd et al. Identified is a little different to the others, so we'll think about that briefly first. And we'll think about that as really a non-communicative motive. So some users stated that they retweeted to save tweets for future personal access. Now, at the time that Boyd et al. Did their survey in 2010, there was no specific means of marking or bookmarking a tweet for future reference. Tweets can easily become lost in the millions of tweets that are posted every day. And so if you see something that interests you and you think you might want to come back to it later, retweeting it is one way to make it quick and easy to find again, because it will appear on your feed. It will be associated with your account. So in this sense, users who reported this are reporting that they've co-opted the retweet option to create some kind of archive of tweets for future reference. We might also see this as perhaps similar to note-taking, where we write something down for our own future selves to look back on and remember. A bookmarking feature was introduced to Twitter in 2018, and this has given users an alternative way to do this. It would be quite interesting, I think, to return and survey users again to see if they still retweet for this purpose. I'm not sure how well known the bookmarking feature is, or how easy it is necessarily to find. But let's leave this non-communicative motive aside for the moment and move on to motivations that have a little more clearly a communicative purpose. Some of the motivations for retweeting seem to come from the desire to spread information more widely. So let's call this informative retweeting. And we see this in motives B and C from Boyd et al.'s list. So to amplify or spread tweets to a new audience, and to entertain or inform a specific audience, or as an act of curation. So in these cases, the retweet is motivated by the retweeter's belief that the information will be relevant to their followers. So an example of this is on the screen now. So this is a tweet from April 2016, and it comes from the BBC Breaking News account. It's announcing the death of the musician Prince. Now, this was a huge news story at the time, and so I think it's fairly reasonable to assume that the 6,330 people who retweeted this post did so because they thought that their followers would find this information relevant. Now let's look at another example and think about the information value of the tweet that's been rebroadcast. So on the screen now, you'll see a tweet posted by Chelsea Football Club, the official Twitter account of Chelsea Football Club, on the 2nd of May 2016. And this was posted as part of a live Twitter commentary during a football match. It's reporting that a player has scored an equalising goal. And as you see, it's been retweeted over 6,000 times. Now, many of these retweets were posted without any further comment attached. And at first, it might seem reasonable to conclude that users were choosing to retweet this post because they wanted to spread the information to a wider audience. So it might, on the surface, seem a simple case of information spreading. But when we look a bit closer and we consider in a bit more detail the context in which these retweets were posted, and if we take a closer look also at the functionality of Twitter, this information motivation perhaps seems a little bit less central, and there's something else going on as well. Now first, we might reasonably assume that anyone who is interested in this particular live football match would be following the commentary themselves. They would see the goal announcement if they were watching the match or following it on Twitter or any other way that they might be following the game. They can choose to follow the Twitter feed of the football club. They can choose to follow the hashtag that you see included in the tweet itself. Furthermore, a retweet that doesn't have a comment attached only appears in the timelines of people who do not follow the original account. Therefore, the only people who would have seen the retweets there are those who are not already actively following the match and the progress of this particular team. The information in this tweet is also time sensitive. It's only relevant at the point in the game at which the goal was scored. There's no guarantee that the score will remain as it is, or indeed that this will be the final score. Anybody who's really interested in the game will have to go and check that information elsewhere to find out what the final score was. So it doesn't really help people who might come across this later but who are interested in the game. Why then have so many people clicked on the button to retweet this announcement? Well, the key to understanding what motivated over 6,000 people to do this lies, I'm suggesting, in accepting that sometimes people retweet because they want to communicate how they are feeling. They want to communicate their attitude towards the information in the tweet that they are rebroadcasting. The retweeters of this post are happy that their team has scored an equalising goal. They want all of their followers to know how they are feeling. And we can think of this as attitudinal retweeting. And indeed, we see it reflected in several of the categories that Boyd et al. Identified in their survey. So here are some of the categories from Boyd et al. Which seem to be capturing this attitudinal retweeting that we've just seen. To comment on someone's tweet by retweeting and adding new content, often to begin a conversation. So commenting on the tweet is what's important there. To publicly agree with someone, so to communicate your agreement, and to validate others' thoughts. So someone else has had a thought and you want to endorse it or validate it in some way. In these cases, the motivation for retweeting is at least partly to communicate an attitude towards the original message. And I put another example on the screen there. In this case, the rebroadcaster, the retweeter, has made their attitude explicit by using the quote tweet option and adding the comment good. Now let's move on to another motivation. Again, I'm going to use a tweet from Chelsea Football Club Twitter feed to illustrate this one. So this tweet was posted on the day after a football match. It's a photo of the captain of the team and it has the caption you can see there, "Good morning." Hopefully you can also see that it's been retweeted 533 times. Why would that be? It's hard to imagine how wishing somebody a good morning could have information value for a wider audience. Presumably it's just intended for the people who are following. As we saw, people who were interested will have seen the tweet anyway, so it seems to have fairly limited information value. It's also not entirely clear how the retweeter's attitude is relevant here either. Can you have an attitude about someone wishing you a good morning? Now, it's possible that the retweeters here are sharing in the sentiment that it is a good morning because they won their game the previous evening. However, I think something else is also going on here. Those people who retweeted this message are signalling their affiliation, their association, and perhaps even their loyalty to the club. And we can think of this as socially motivated retweeting, or what we might call phatic retweeting. The content is retweeted to manage in some way the relationship between the retweeter and the person who posted the original content. In some cases, such as this, it's about demonstrating loyalty and association, but we can see from Boyd et al.'s survey that there are other social motives reported as well. So let's take a look at those. So in category D, Boyd et al. Provide the following motivation: to comment on someone's tweet by retweeting and adding new content, often to begin a conversation. So there's a social dimension to the retweeting here. It's designed to get a conversation started. To make one's presence as a listener visible. So this is to say, hello, I've heard your message and I'm here, I'm a listener. So perhaps that's what motivated some of these people to retweet the tweet we've just seen, is to say, I've heard it, I've heard your message, I'm here. And they also identified the following motive. People retweet as an act of friendship, loyalty, or homage by drawing attention, sometimes via a retweet request. So again, this is about managing the relationship. This is an act of friendship, loyalty, paying homage to the original account. So some users knowingly seem to use the retweet option to manage social interactions and to manage social relationships. Now there's a couple of Boyd et al.'s categories left over at this point. And if we look more closely at those cases, we see that the respondents to Boyd et al.'s survey framed their responses in terms of the perlocutionary acts that were being performed. That is, they explained their actions in terms of the effects of the act on the participants involved. So those are on the second half of the screen at the moment, to recognise or to refer to less popular people or less visible content. So if you retweet and express your attitude, perhaps endorsing a post, this might have the effect of making the content more visible to more people, and that might be one of the things that you want to achieve by retweeting. In J, for self-gain, either to gain followers or reciprocity from more visible participants. So in this case, you're tweeting to manage a social relationship. This might have positive benefits for you as a retweeter. People might give you something back because you've retweeted them. And then finally, back to motivation C, which we've seen before, but notice that it starts with this motivation of entertaining, to entertain or inform a specific audience. So spreading information more widely might be done with that motivation of entertaining people. And that's how some users have described it in their motivations for retweeting. So to summarise the ideas in this short video, users rebroadcast content for a variety of reasons. We can understand these as falling into three categories: informational, attitudinal, and social retweeting. It's important to note that any one particular act of retweeting might be motivated by more than one of these motivations. They're not mutually exclusive. I also want to leave you with the thought that we find these same categories of use in other acts of communication, in offline acts of communication. And I discuss these patterns in the rest of the chapter of my book, chapter 3 of Pragmatics Online. I talk about what is known as the attributive use of language and attributive uses, and how we can understand rebroadcasting in these terms. So a phenomenon that we find in other communicative acts and in other uses of language, attributive use, also shows up online, particularly in these acts of rebroadcasting such as retweeting. Thank you for listening.